Welcome back to the channel, little flexers. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. Today is an introduction video to the GLC format. I know when I first started playing the Gym Leader Challenge format, I got a little bit lost on what cards to include. Let me catch you up to speed on the 3 rules of Gym Leader Challenge if you don't already know them already. First is that all decks are monotype. Second is that you can't have more than 1 copy of a card in a deck aside from basic energy. And the third is that no rule box Pokemon or rule box trainers are allowed. So nothing like Pokemon Vs, VMAXs, EXs, GXs, Ace Specs, Prism Stars. You get the idea. So for today's video, we're going to take a look at all of the trainers that you must play in decks that are pretty much as close to an auto-include in every deck as possible, just to give you a solid base from which you can expand into each of the archetypes. And then I will give you in the second half of the video some of the trainers that are maybe a little bit more debatable and give you some reasons as to why that is. It's my hope that this video will give you a good analysis on the supporters, items, and tool cards that you would need to build a proper Gym Leader Challenge deck. I hope that my insight will provide very valuable to those people that are either starting out in the Gym Leader Challenge or are very new to it. So if that's you, please make sure to like this video so somebody else might see this content and learn a little bit more about this great format and how to build decks in it. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. And as always, the lists are going to be down in the description below. So if you want to just copy and paste it into your own PTCGO, feel free to do that. And hey, voila, you already have half your deck built. Now, let's get into the lists. So we are going to be covering over some of the staple trainers as I see them in the Gym Leader Challenge format. This video is for people that maybe don't know where to start on getting into the Gym Leader Challenge. I've been playing for 10 plus years now. So all these cards that I'm, pointing out are cards that I've lived through, I've played, and they definitely rise to the top as some of the cream of the crop. We're separating this into 2 parts. So first part is going to be all the trainers that I think are must includes. They're on the screen right now, and I'll talk a little bit more about them. And then we have the second part, which is going to be trainers that are a little bit more fluid, that are good in some cases, but maybe not all cases. So starting out here, these are some of the best in the game. Okay, some of the best items, trainers in the game, supporters, tools, all that stuff. We're going to start off with Escape Rope. I find that Escape Rope is absolutely necessary because not only does it push your opponent's active, they might be building up something massive. You got like the Wishy-Washes of the world, the Wailords of the world, even like the Raikus, the Guzzlords, some things that you just can't knock out in one hit. Escape Rope can take care of that, right? Because it's going to push something else up that's not their main attacker. But it also provides you a switch out. There's a lot of Pokemon in the format that can sleep, that can paralyze. And so Escape Rope, or maybe a switch even, allows you to switch your active without needing a supporter. So there's a lot of supporter cards that are just super good at switching. Tate Liza, another staple that we'll get to, Guzma, that kind of thing. But then you don't need one of those, right? So you can play your item card, push yourself out of the active, get out of that status condition, and get on with life. So I like an Escape Rope in every deck, or a switch, depending. I think there might be a use case for switch over Escape Rope. Maybe if you're playing a more like beat stick deck, like a water deck, you might just want to switch instead of an Escape Rope. But I still think Escape Rope, very, very good. Going to be in every single deck that I play. Evo Incense, Evosoda, both along the same veins. I think if you're playing any sort of evolution deck, you're going to want these. And if you're playing in the Gym Leader Challenge, you're going to be playing evolutions. So Evo Incense, Evosoda, very close to must-haves in pretty much every list. Now let's get to the balls. There are a handful of balls that are usable in this format, but I think the 3 that come to mind as being staples are Level Ball, Nest Ball, and Quick Ball. These are the lowest maintenance cards that you can play, searching out, your basics with Nest Ball for free, essentially. Most of your basics with Level Ball, essentially for free. And then at the cost of 1 card is Quick Ball. We're going to get to the other balls, Great Ball, Ultra Ball. I think those are very good cards and very much should be things that you should consider. Even Timer Ball is like probably a good card that you should play. But again, those are things you should consider and maybe not auto includes. These are the auto includes. And I think that the cost of like an Ultra Ball for some decks is maybe a little bit too high. I just don't think of it as that kind of auto include like these ones. Rare Candy. Now, there's some debate on Rare Candy. A lot of times it can be, kind of a hard to find card in the deck, right? It can be something that you don't often find. You can't actually draw it out of your deck unless you have like a teammates or some other card that finds that specific Rare Candy from the deck. And oftentimes people will say, well, it comes into play too late to be meaningful. But I find that Rare Candy is a staple for me because it allows me to prize that middle evolution. And so if I have Rare Candy in my deck, it basically functions in a lot of ways as just some insurance against prizes, insurance against prizing that middle stage evolution, meaning that especially in certain decks like Grass, for instance, that really relies on stage 2s, you're going to be able to get out something that could advance your board state. Another staple for me, VS Seeker. Self-explanatory, but I feel like VS Seeker almost reads as like, play another boss's orders or play another Guzma, right? Like that's kind of what you're going to get back from it. If you're using the VS Seekers to get back draw supporters, I don't think that's the best use of VS Seeker. One of the things in the Gym Leader Challenge that is a weakness to exploit in basically every deck is the lack of gust. So things like VS Seeker, things like Cynthia and Caitlin, 2 cards that can get back your boss's orders and your Guzmas, I think are pretty much close to staple cards. Now, VS Seeker, of course, has that luxury of being other things. It can be your Colress, it can be your N, your research. All those things are important for sure. But VS Seeker, I think, really is just here to get back Gust because you want to make sure that you have Gust at any point in the game that you want. Another nice use for VS Seeker is chaining Hex. So that's another possible use for VS Seeker that is also kind of like not a draw card, right? Because I think there are enough draw cards in this format that you should try to rely on your draw cards to be draw cards and your VS Seekers to be something unique and special. Coming on down to the rest of the supporters, we got Ball Guy here. Search your deck for up to 3 different item cards that have the word ball in their name. So I think of Ball Guy as a staple, even if you're just playing the 3 balls. Ball Guy to me seems like a staple even then, because it's going to get you out your basics, right? Ball Guy is just another kind of Brigette, Sonia fan club, gets out your basics, facilitates your strategy early and often. Coming on down to Brigette, of course, that's, again, very similar to Ball Guy. Same idea. Going to get 3 of your basics. And I think it's a very strong card. And I think pretty much a staple in every list. Boss's Orders and Guzma. We shouldn't really have to talk about why these cards are good, but these are the best, most consistent Gust in the GLC format. I love Boss. I love Guzma. You really can't play these decks without these cards because it's going to be so pivotal to try to target down your opponent's support Pokemon and try to get those out of the way before you start swinging into their attackers in most cases, right? You want to cut the head off the snake before you deal with the body. So like getting rid of the Frostmoth, which is an enabler for water, getting rid of the Blastoise, which is an enabler for water, is going to be way better than trying to swing in to their active. Force them to do stuff that they don't want to do, that your opponent doesn't want to do. And these are the best cards to do that. But another automatic inclusion that I have is Colress. I think that there maybe is a reason not to include Colress because the early game, it just sucks so bad. However, the late game potential is too strong to ignore. And Colress is one of those supporters that even if your opponent doesn't play into it, you can still facilitate enough draw to make Colress a worthwhile supporter, right? Like you can play enough bench Pokemon. Colressing for 5, not fantastic, but it's not going to lose you the game in most cases. So Colress, I like this, even though it relies on your opponent. They're normally going to play enough bench Pokemon that it makes sense. In one case where Colress might not make sense, if you're playing like a rush deck, maybe something like Fighting or Lightning, that just aims to go kind of as hard as possible, as early as possible. Well, maybe Colress doesn't make enough sense, but you have to really, you really convince yourself otherwise, because I find Colress is quite the card in the format here. So Cynthia and Caitlin, we've already talked about. Get back those Gus, and a nice draw 3 supporter coming into the Marnie. Each player shuffles their hand, puts it on the bottom of their deck. If you're familiar with Standard, you'll know that this is one of the best and actually the only disruption supporter in post-rotation Standard. But you draw 5 cards, your opponent draws 4. Marnie, fantastic card, helps you churn through your deck a little bit better. Like in a lot of ways, Marnie is actually a better Cynthia or a better N in the early game because you put all the cards that you didn't want early on the bottom and then draw new cards, fresh cards, hopefully things that can you'll get your strategy up and running. So I like Marnie a lot. I like Marnie a lot in this format for sure. And another card that is an absolute must. This is the best disruption supporter in the game. And so when you're playing an N, you know, you usually want to save that for the late game, right? When your opponent goes down to like 1 prize, right? Their last gasp. Try to end them out of the cards that they need and go on with life. It's very much a comeback potential card. We talk about the expanded format and the GLC format being a format of potential comebacks, and this card is really the reason why. Coming on down, the best draw supporter that we may have ever seen. Professor Juniper, Professor's Research, you know, Professor Sycamore, whatever you want to call it. Discard your hand, draw 7. Insane card. Sonia, I love because of the versatility. It's like the Draymond Green of supporters, right? In some games, it's going to get you, you know, your 2 basic Pokemon. It's going to be that spark, that igniter. In the other games, it's going to bring the energy, going to bring the heat. And yeah, Sonia, insane card. I feel like I haven't seen this card in a lot of lists, like in every list, but I do feel like it's one of those cards that should just be in every list because it can get the energy, because it can get the basics. It's good on the first turn. It's pretty good on the last turn. Like this card a lot. Tate and Liza. Choose one, shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 5, or switch your active Pokemon. What makes Tate and Liza very good is this versatility. You can switch, which we don't really have a lot of switch cards in the Gym Leader Challenge format. You got your, you know, Escape Rope, which not every deck plays, but I think they should. You got your Guzma, which is that staple Gus supporter. You have Air Balloon, maybe, you know, Float Stone, Air Balloon, something like that. But then you have your Tate and Liza. This is a huge, huge card for decks in the expanded format because it can be a draw supporter, but it can also be a coveted switch for when you need to get something out of the active. Maybe your opponent gusted up a card that you didn't want there. Go ahead and Tate and Liza it away. A couple of tools here to round out the staples. Float Stone. Need I say more? Their Pokemon this attached to has no retreat. Should be pretty obvious there why it's so good, but getting those fat boys out of the active, the Whale Lords, the Guzzlords of the worlds, any, you know, stage 2s, Venusaur and the like, they have no retreat cost and makes them very, very mobile when you play that Float Stone. Finally, Muscle Band. Not a card, again, that I see in every single deck, but I truly feel like it's a staple card because you're just doing more damage. Like that's always a good thing, right? A lot of decks maybe do more damage based on how much energy is attached, but Muscle Band is just going to be good for you to hit those numbers to reach a little bit higher. And it's free damage essentially, right? With those energy hogs like Zarude and Lapras, they're going to do damage based on the amount of energy attached. But you can only attach 1 energy per turn unless you have something like a Rillaboom or a Frostmoth Blastoise combo to get those energy down. Muscle Band just gives you a little boost without needing those other cards. So that concludes the staple cards. Let's move on to kind of the secondary tier 2 trainer cards. All right, so moving into the tier 2 trainer cards. These are the cards that I feel like are very strong, but you maybe need to have a good reason for including them in your list. Like these are the cards that after you get past the staple cards, you're going to have to make decisions based on how your deck functions, whether or not you're kind of a late game based deck or an aggro early based deck. You're going to have to kind of, again, just make these decisions on these cards. They're not necessarily right for every single archetype, but they are generally good cards that you shouldn't feel bad, you know, about including, that really fill the roles that you want them to fulfill if you have those roles, right? So here we go. We'll start here with the Field Blower. Field Blower, not super necessary in every deck just because there are some times where, you know, Garbodor I can think of as like the main reason to play Field Blower. Well, Garbodor doesn't necessarily affect every single deck in the GLC as much as others. So Field Blower is not a huge necessity just because while there are a lot of good tools in the format, there are some tools that are maybe more impactful than others, but then those same tools can't be used by every single deck. So if, let's say, for instance, Lightning, you don't figure that Lightning is going to be very popular, but Lightning really likes to use the Cape of Toughness on their Raikou. Well, if you don't think Lightning is going to be that popular, maybe you don't include Field Blower. Similarly, coming back to that Garbodor illusion, if you don't feel like Garbodor is going to be that popular, well, maybe you don't need Field Blower, or if you don't feel that Garbodor is going to affect your deck that much, again, maybe Field Blower isn't for you. A couple of ball cards that I want to highlight here, Great Ball and Timer Ball, as well as Ultra Ball. These are really, like, don't get me wrong, again, these are really good cards in this format, but the gripe that I have against Great Ball and Timer Ball are that they're not guarantees, and I feel like in this format, you like to have the surefire thing. You like to have the guarantee. So Great Ball is going to look at the top 7. Timer Ball is going to be based off of coin flips. I like to stay away from these cards generally. If I don't have a better option, I'll include those. Or if I'm really, really looking, to get a certain combo of multiple cards out, or if my, stage 1 or stage 2 evolution is too crucial to the deck, I'll include Great Ball, I'll include Timer Ball. But just know that they're not automatic inclusions for me, just based on the fact that they're not a guarantee. Now, Ultra Ball I want to talk a little bit about because that's another one where it's not an auto-include in every single deck. It probably slots in there. It's probably going to be one of my last 60, but it's not something that I auto-include. It's not something that I think is, too good to not include. So Ultra Ball, discard 2 cards from your hand. You'll notice it's a little bit different than the Quick Ball. Quick Ball discards 1, Ultra Ball discards 2. At the benefit, though, of not only being able to search out basic Pokemon, you can search out the evolutions. So Ultra Ball is quite good, but then remember the essence of the format. Being a singleton format, you're going to discard cards that you cannot easily get back later in the game. So that's where I think Ultra Ball kind of misses the mark a little bit. Again, do I think it belongs in most decks? Yeah, probably. But if you don't include Ultra Ball, that I think is completely fine, and you have good justification for it, I think that's completely fine. I think we're still starting to get a grip of what this format can do, what these decks can do. And I think Ultra Ball is one of those cards where I think people snap include it, and then maybe they should rethink that. Do they often use Ultra Ball for its intended purpose? Is it a good card to find in their deck early? I would argue sometimes it's not. You're going to be discarding those cards that you would want to have later in the game, and sometimes that can really come back to bite you. So Ultra Ball there, tier 2 item on my list. Let's talk about some recovery now. We got 3 recovery cards, 4 if you count the Brock's Grid, but we got Ordinary Rod, Rescue Stretcher, and Super Rod, as well as Brock's Grid. Now, the thing with recovery is that you're going to want some combination of these cards for sure, but you don't need all of them. And you might not even need, 2 of them. You might just need the 1. And so Ordinary Rod and Super Rod, very, very similar. I think in some decks that are kind of more Rain Dance decks, I think of Water specifically, Super Rod might be better because it can just grab you those water energy back into the deck. Whereas Ordinary Rod, you can only get 2 water energy if that's what you're going for. And then you can, obviously get your 2 Pokemon. So the last one here, Rescue Stretcher, the last item that can recover, it just puts a card from your discard pile into your hand. That is the big benefit. You could also play something like Buddy Buddy Rescue, but the nice thing about Rescue Stretcher is that they can also shuffle things back into the deck, which can be very relevant against the mill decks and the stall decks in this GLC format. Brock's Grit is a card that I think is a little bit too slow for my styles of decks. I'd rather rely on the item cards to recover Pokemon and energy than playing a Brock's Grit. But I could see where Brock's Grit might fall into consideration for you if you have, just these big, beefy attackers that are energy hogs that you maybe need to get back, 6 basic energy to go up and attack with again. It's all, again, based on your play style of these decks. For me, I don't love Brock's Grit because it takes my supporter slot for turn, but definitely can argue in favor of it in including in your deck. You got Pokegear, searching out supporters. I don't know, my thought here with the Pokegear is that you're going to be a little bit more weak to Trainer Lock, which there is in this format. You got things like Cryogonal, you got things like Luxio, and so those Trainer Locking Pokemon are going to, make Pokegear essentially worthless. So I like to have just a raw copy of a supporter over a Pokegear, but if you're including Pokegear because you don't think that there are better supporters, by all means. We got Pokemon Communication. Decks normally play somewhere between 13 and 15, 16 Pokemon. Any more than that, and you're probably clunking up your deck. Any less than that, and you probably don't have the firepower in the late game. So Pokemon Communication is not really a card that you see played in formats where decks only have, 13 Pokemon, right? So I generally am going to be not the biggest fan of Pokemon communication because you can't even search it out with a card like Ball Guy, for instance. We got Scoop Up Net here as an item that I believe belongs in every deck, but certainly is contestable. Scoop Up Net allows you to put a Pokemon that isn't a Pokemon V or a Pokemon GX into your hand. So that's basically everything in the Gym Leader Challenge format. I like Scoop Up Net a lot in the Psychic decks. Be able to reuse the Marshadow for either early game draw or late game disruption. And just generally speaking, Scoop Up Net can be a switch card, a pivot card, if something from your bench gets drawn active. Let's keep on going here. Town Map. Look at your face down prize cards, turn them face up. I like that. Cute little card. Not much needs to be said there. If you're feeling like, picking out each of your cards one by one from your prizes, not a bad inclusion. And I think has a lot of merit in these one prize formats. Tropical Beach. Now, Tropical Beach is a stadium. Once during each player's turn, they may draw up to 7 cards in their hand. And if they do, that player's turn ends. The nice thing about Tropical Beach is that, again, it doesn't cost your supporter for the turn. So you can play a Sonia, you can play a Brigette, and then also slap down that Tropical Beach and refill your hand. Now, the problem with Tropical Beach is that your opponent also gets to do this. So if they have a bad hand and you find yourself with the beach and you play it down, they might be able to draw out of their bad position. Additionally, Tropical Beach is very hard to find on that first turn. Of course, we're just playing singletons. You could play a Stadium Nav maybe to give yourself a little bit more access, but for all intents and purposes, I'd rather play a supporter and try to attack earlier than hide behind Tropical Beach. It's not a card for every deck, but it is a card for some decks, and that's why it's a tier 2 card in my opinion. Ace Trainer. Now this one's very controversial. I think Ace Trainer is looked upon by some people as being a staple, whereas other people will say, not really that needed. If you play this card, you can play this card only if you have more prize cards left than your opponent. Each player shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck, then draws 6 cards. Your opponent draws 3. Okay? So you get 6, your opponent gets 3. It's a card. This card, what can I say about Ace Trainer? It's like, I would like to be winning the game. So if I ever find myself in a position to play Ace Trainer, like I'd rather not be in that position, right? There's enough good support Pokemon out there that I feel like Ace Trainer isn't the most worthwhile in every single matchup. And at the point that I get to play Ace Trainer, which is probably at, turn 3 at the latest, right? After my opponent has built up a board to get an attacker to knock out one of my Pokemon, like I would hope that my board's already solidified and then I can start putting pressure on my opponent. I don't love Ace Trainer. I'd rather have a little bit more of an aggressive supporter, something that draws me cards without my opponent needing to do anything. But I could see where you would want Ace Trainer because the disruption is very good and we lack that kind of disruption. We have N, we have Marnie, we have Judge, and then I guess we got Ace Trainer in this format as well. Avery is a card I've seen. Forces your opponent to discard down to 3 bench Pokemon. I'd rather just play the Stadium, Parallel City, but to each their own. We also got Bird Keeper. Switch your active Pokemon with your bench, draw 3. Again, if you're playing super fat attackers, consider Bird Keeper. Otherwise, keep it out of the deck. A couple of supporters here that just draw cards that all kind of fall in the same vein. Bruno, again, relies on your opponent, so it's very good if your opponent knocks something out, but again, it relies on your opponent to do something, and a shuffle and draw 4 in the early game, if this is your only supporter, is maybe not the greatest. So consider heavily if there's not a better supporter for you to play other than Bruno. I also got Copycat in a similar vein. Your opponent can, if they know you have a Copycat, they know you're playing it, they can pare their hand down so that they make it kind of pointless to play the Copycat, right? We've all been there. We've Copycatted for 1, 2, 3 cards. Like, it sucks for sure. So Copycat, definitely want to make sure you've exhausted all of your better supporters before thinking about these ones. Got Cynthia. I include this as a maybe supporter just because, again, it depends on the strategy of your deck. Sometimes you maybe wouldn't want to shuffle. You just want to draw cards. So Cynthia, it's probably going to go in every deck that I play, but just know that if you don't have it in there and you have a good reason to not include it, you're totally cool. Erica's Hospitality. Again, I look for these supporters when I'm looking in this format for supporters that don't rely on what my opponent does. So Copycats, Brunos, teammates, Erica's Hospitality, force yourself to draw cards based on your opponent's number of Pokemon. So if they don't play much down, you're going to get really punished. I think the exception to this one is Colress, because at least you have some kind of control over that, right? Your bench, you have some control over that Colress. I digress. Erica's Hospitality, good card, likely inclusion, but it's something you got to consider. Now, Gladion falls in that same vein as Town Map. Whether or not you want to know your prizes and get one out depends on how important those lines are to you. If you have one big attacker that you need to get out every game, I would think about something like Raikou in Electric. Like, you just basically need that boy out every single game. Or if you're Fire and you're really relying around the Emboar, you got to get that Pokemon out onto the field. So Gladion might help you there. Hex Maniac. Now, this might be controversial too, just because of how important this seems. So Tricky Jim has been raving about Hex Maniac, particularly in water, but even in things like grass, like there are a lot of abilities that are so strong. Like a ton of abilities that are super strong, and playing Hex Maniac at the right time can swing the game in your favor. Seriously, you never played this format, Hex Maniac is super good. I consider it not a must-have in this format because there are decks that rush early. There are decks that just try to overwhelm the opponent very early. And so Hex Maniac is more of a late game card, whereas some decks want to just be as aggressive as early as possible. Great card, probably again, in all my lists, but not something that is 100% necessary. Coming down to the Judge, this feels like another supporter that falls in that same vein as Ace Trainer. Like, at the point that I'm playing Judge to try to draw cards, it's really not going to be a good time, but it can disrupt the opponent early, and I like that about it. Lusamine, something that you're not going to see very often, but it's another way to recover the gust effects. So if you're playing something a little bit slower, a deck that maybe is more methodical, then consider Lusamine as an option. We got a Lysander's Trump card. Each player shuffles all cards into his or her discard pile into his or her deck. Pretty cool card if you are churning through the deck. I think Lightning can most effectively use this card because they have the Zebstrika that's going to sprint away the hand and draw 4, so they can more easily play Lysander's Trump card to get back all those important resources that they, played earlier. We got Fan Club, not an auto inclusion because it's not as versatile as the Sonia. And then we also have Teammates, again, another card that relies on your opponent to do something. This kind of falls in with Raihan from the newest set Evolving Skies. Do these cards have a lot in common? Absolutely. Do they both count on your opponent doing something to you? Definitely. Not an auto include. Again, there are a lot of decks that are just rush decks, or there are decks that want to have big hands and teammatesing for, 1 or 2, important cards, teammatesing a Raihan for 1 or 2 important cards isn't going to mean the difference between winning and losing. Teammates a really good card in those decks that need 1 or 2 energy. I'm thinking of Dark as a really great example where like the Weezing attacks for 1 energy, the Weavile attacks for 1 energy, the Zoroark attacks for 1 energy. So you have all these low energy attackers that are going to go up against your opponent's Pokemon. I think in that, Teammates make them a little bit more sense than some of the heavier hitting decks like the Fires and the Waters of the world. Coming into the tools and rounding out these tier 2 trainer cards, we got Air Balloon, another switch. I think at this point, I've already sung the praises enough of having things like a switch or an escape rope. So Air Balloon, great card for the most part, but definitely arguable as an include. Got Cape of Toughness. Of course, you're going to want more HP on your Pokemon, but you always want to ask yourself, is there a better card that I could be playing? Every time you play a deck, you want to be asking yourself this question. For Cape of Toughness, you're going to have a lot of attackers that aren't basics that aren't going to be able to take full advantage of Cape of Toughness. So, arguable card, good, absolutely. Necessary, maybe not so much. Final card here is the Experience Share. Falls in that same vein as a lot of the other cards where it forces your opponent to do something, right? Like in those early turns of the game, am I going to want to see an Experience Share? Sometimes I'll ask myself that. And a lot of times the answer is no. But it can be so busted in the late game. So you just have to weigh that kind of early game need with the late game potential. In this case, Experience Share, going to be a horrible card for you in your opening hand, but might pay off in the long run if you can keep it on. If the video you just saw was informative, interesting, or fun, please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more great Pokemon TCG content. That's going to be all for me today. If I don't see you soon, I'll see you later. And remember, good luck and also have fun.